at last, our freezer paper show. We will be taking you from a pieced cat to a maple leaf to a crescent moon. Is that enough design potential for you? Plus, you are going to love the increased accuracy of sewing with freezer paper at the sewing machine. A Breaking the Rules segment will be working with Madras plaid. Freezer paper works for patchwork because of two principles, and I want you to be perfectly clear of these before we start the design. When you buy it, it'll have a dull side and a shiny side. The shiny or the wax side is the side that we will be pressing with a dry iron to the back side of our fabric. In fact, I understand this is the side that you put towards food when you freeze it. I'm ashamed to say I don't freeze with this. I use it in the sewing room. Now, it's this side, the dull side, that we will place the code on, and we'll learn exactly how to code our freezer paper. But once you have it cut out, your little template, and it will adhere readily. Now, you can reuse this as many as 20 times, so that is my clue to believe that the wax really does not come off or even bother the back side of the fabric. The important thing is that once you place it here and press it, that it will stay there long enough for you to cut off an excess on either end, which becomes your seam allowance, and then take it to the sewing machine, and you have an exact line to follow when you're sewing. I've always been a little envious of those hand piecers when they were drawing around their templates and they would create an exact pencil line to follow. Now, ladies, you have an exact line on the paper to follow at the sewing machine, and that template will stay until you sew and then remove it. What about the design potential of freezer paper? And also, how did I discover it? I had the opportunity to take a class from Pauline Burbridge. She is from London, England. She does very graphic and contemporary work now in London, but she originally started with piece designs that were done much like our Hey Diddle Diddle, the cat and the fiddle. This was the design I picked up in her classroom, learning how to take this design and getting the primary design elements from it, and then introducing straight vertical lines that became my grid. Then I would, between sections where it was curved, all of a sudden make a straight line, knowing that was going to be my piece line. Of course, from there, you know where to go because we've had lessons in enlarging our designs. And this has been enlarged. Once your design is the size you want it, I would color it in. In other words, where did I want the green eyes? Where did I want his little nose? And then once that has been done, you can go to your fabric bin and come up with the colors that you want. I had these all chosen, pre-washed, and ready to be cut. Now, my next design element I wanted to cover is the maple leaf. I think it's important for you to remember that all of your designs need to be on some sort of a master grid. In other words, you are going to copy from this, because once you do your freezer paper designs, you're going to cut them up. You want to always have a point of reference so you can go back and look. This, I have taken just one design, the maple leaf, and played with it. Sometimes the leaves have gotten longer, sometimes they've been turned at angles, and they've gotten shorter. But just by taking the exact back and the two fronts of a vest, I have designed a vest. You might even want to think about doing asymmetrical lines, and you get kind of a weird maple leaf. Or how about uneven lines? Each time your maple leaf changes. Or wider lines, and you can get a short, fat, squatty maple leaf. The other design potential might be a crescent moon, or what we sometimes refer to as a wall hanging that would have stars with personality. You remember when you were in school, and you should have been paying attention, you would be making 5-pointed stars. We call those 5-pointed stars with personality, and a crescent moon. All of a sudden, it can be done by introducing our interrupted rectangles. Curves can be created. These are really straight lines, but when they join one rectangle to the next, all of a sudden you have that wonderful curved design. The coding is very important when you're doing any of your freezer paper patchwork. Now, you want to, first of all, take your design, as I have done with the maple leaf, and transfer it off onto what we would call the outside or the right side of your freezer paper. This becomes the inside or the wrong side. You want to put those two sides together. In other words, when you copy or transfer your design, you'll be taking the inside of your maple leaf and the inside of your freezer paper and transferring it off. You realize that once you iron that on, your design will become reversed. So you need to transfer it from the back side. The other codes that are important would be your rows, A, B, C, D, all the way across. Number your templates. This would be number 1, number 2. And notice here, I decided I want this and this to be the same color, so all of a sudden that becomes my whole template. Number 3, number 4, and number 5. Also, go back to the colors that you had decided upon, and then all of a sudden, this row right here, I would place my green, my red, my gray, whatever I wanted. Code this, because this is your permanent template. Let's go to the sewing machine and see how this all works. I'm ready to sew row J of the maple leaf vest. Can you find row J? Remember, this has all been marked off in 1-inch strips on the outside of the freezer paper. That's the non-waxy side. Now I'm going to get my little work area all set up at the machine, and this becomes my accessible play area. You want to make certain that you are centered with the machine, your iron is on the right, and then your cutting table is on the left. I like these smaller cutting tables. You might even want to put one of the blades that might even have a little nick on it and save it for all of your paperwork, and then save another blade for all your cloth work. Once that's been established, you can cut your rows apart. The minute I decided on this maple leaf vest, I chose all my fabrics, and once I knew that I was working with a 1-inch strip, all my fabric was cut a 1/2 inch wider than that. So these are 1.5 inch wide strips. Once my row J has been cut, then I could go to a smaller ruler. It makes it a little bit easier to handle. I can pick up my paper blade and come and simply cut that exactly on that area. We're going to cut a green out, and then we're going to cut a red out. Our first template and then our second template. The minute that has been done, pick up my green fabric, place that exactly on there. Look how all of a sudden I can see my seam allowance on either side. Go over to the iron, and I'm ready to press that in place. The minute you have any kind of an angle, give yourself a little extra room down here at the bottom. Press that on, the green. Then I'd come to my red fabric and do the same thing. The minute that's been positioned in place, and of course if you've got your swivel chair, you can readily get from the iron, and then you're going to go back. Now these have been anchored in place. I know they're going to stay there while I sew. I'd come back, and using my little ruler again, and this time pick up my cloth. I've got from this edge out and into the first marking line, I have a 1/4 inch. So all of a sudden I can line that up and exactly cut that. All of a sudden I have my 1/4 inch, and then I simply turn that, and I have my 1/4 inch here. It's also nice to remember that I had given myself a grain line. That was the stray of the grain. All these pieces that were cut either on the stray of the grain, or they could be cut on the crosswise. The important thing is that it's not a bias fabric that you're cutting. All right, I do the same thing for the green. Give myself a seam allowance above and give myself a seam allowance below. Once that has been done, I would get the excess fabric out of the way. Go back to my code. I knew that was number 1 and this was number 2. Now, the beauty of this, these are not 45 or 60-degree angles. They're weird angles, and that's when it becomes hard to piece them together. But all of a sudden, I know I want to put the 2 right sides together, and I'm going to hold this up to the light. Now, I like to do this on a nice sunny day so that you can simply line that up and come and line this one up right next to it. Sometimes, if your fabric doesn't readily show through, you can even take a pin and put one pin through and come out right there. And see how that's off just a little? That means I have to scooch that down a little bit. Now what you're really lining up, even though you've cut perfect 1/4 inch seam allowances, but what you're really lining up are the paper edges, aren't you? Line that up and line that up, and then you're ready to sew. You simply hold it with your fingers, it's not going anywhere, and come and take a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. You are sewing right next to that paper line, all the way down, right next to it, and all the way from one raw edge to the next. The minute you've undone that, you can see, open that up, you can see you've got your perfect line coming all the way up. You've sewn one green to one red, and look at the perfect stitching. The nice thing about that is that I can readily pull that off, put that in a little pile, and if I want to make this vest again, I can simply go to my row J, my figure 1, and my figure 2, and go all the way down. What about our Hey Diddle Diddle wall hanging? This was the J row in that one. Now, believe it or not, there are 18 templates in one row. No wonder I put this project away and said I was not going to make it. I would not want to have made 18 plastic templates and added the 1/4 inch seam allowance. To me, that's not any fun, but this is. And I think one of the most fun parts about this is that as you're doing one row and finish it, and then you add another row, your design starts to grow in front of you. All right, I'm ready to go. Row J, figure 1 is my gray piece. I simply come over here, cut, come here, and cut number 2. I know I have to find a gray and a black. Come over to my iron, and all of a sudden, and once again, I have cut my fabric a 1/2 inch wider. This particular wall hanging, the rows were a little bit wider than 1 inch. So in that case, my project can go a little bit faster. My next template is black. All of a sudden, I have that grain line, so I can adhere that exactly to that. And of course, the nice part about it is if you look at it and don't exactly like the way you've done it, don't worry, just pick it up and reposition it. It will stay again. That's the beauty of it. All right, once you've done that, come over. Now I'm ready for my cloth cutter. Extend that and come all the way down. Now, you don't have to use a rotary cutter. You can also mark it and use your scissors. Maybe you're more prone to be using scissors. Come and give yourself a guide. Come like so, and then simply cut that all the way across. Now your next one, come, and then once that's extended, and turn. So I know that I've got template 1, which was the gray, and then I missed that one. Come back again. 1 was gray, 2 was black. Put this aside, hold that up to the light, and once again I have odd lines, but I know that I'm simply aligning the edges of that freezer paper, and I've got the excess of the fabric all the way down. So from one edge to the next, and you can see exactly how you've gotten right next to it. You can't miss, ladies. I know you're going to love that. You might take a close look at the Hey Diddle Diddle wall hanging. I was in a quandary as to what to quilt in the border of that quilt, so I went to the library and got a nursery rhyme book, and those are the exact musical notes to the nursery rhyme, Hey Diddle Diddle, the Cat and the Fiddle. So if you can play the piano, you can go ahead and play that entire song right from the wall hanging. Now the Crescent Moon, that's another interesting design, and I went with that design to some very interesting fabric. I don't have any of that left, but I can show you on the blue and the gold here. We're in the middle of that design with the Crescent Moon, and once again, I'm on row number G, I'm cutting a part blue, and my next one is coded just a Y, which for me, I know that was the yellow. And once again, I would come, line those up and press them, switch to the yellow, press those, and then cut apart. I think you can readily see how long rows are established. Now, I might mention to you that when you're doing a garment, as you get your rows established, you can then sew those rows together, or you could go ahead and simply place this row right on the Pellon fleece, or say the muslin lining of your vest, and then come with the next piece row, sew and flip back. That is an alternative way of putting a garment together. One thing I wanted to review with you, because it is on the bottom of the Crescent Moon, I'd like to show you the flexicurve. I hope all of you are flexing by now and enjoying that work, but let us pretend that this is the Crescent Moon with the stars. What I did to finish that off was to position or pin some what we call tearaway. That allowed me to take my flexible curve, which is that rubber ruler that is a 1/2 inch on the base or the wider portion. That has the wider flat area. That allowed me to position that in exactly the area that I wanted, curve that, then come, and because this is what we call the base fabric, simply mark that on the bottom. That becomes the curve. I'm going to do a curved, what we call curved string piecing. That has been marked on the bottom. I also mark this exactly where I want to introduce my new fabric, where it'll start being sewn, and this is where it ends. Once that has been done, I would cut that exactly on that line. Cut that curve all the way back. Then the next fabric that I'm going to introduce, a calico, I would then place that same curve to the top of that piece of fabric, and with my marker, mark that this time on the top of my fabric. Remember, the flexible curve is exactly a 1/2 inch wide on the base, so that our actual stitching line is in the middle of that flexible curve. Once that's been done, that code tells me where to start sewing. I can then put a mark there, and down here is where I end. I would then come, and following that exact line, that curve that had been drawn from the top of the flexible curve, I would simply cut this all the way, and what you've done is to create 2 companion curves that have been going together. Now they're going to get married. And what happens is that exactly where you started, you can then put the 2 right sides together and start on the sewing machine, sew, and flip back. And that is how I did that Crescent Moon, and then continually add more mountains on that and then pull that away. Now there is more variety, endless variety that you can do with the freezer paper. I wanted to show you a nice little, I guess you could call this shadow kittens that Donna Edwards has done. And she was inspired from, of all things, a little piece of fabric. Can you see the little shadow kitty cats all sitting one right after another in a row? That was her inspiration. After she had taken a freezer paper patchwork class, then she was ready to go on to her designs. My friend Karen Pervere has a new shop called the Wild Goose. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fitting if she had this wall hanging outside her shop? And of course I presented this to her in paper, not in cloth, and it's been sitting this way for 4 months. Do you have projects like that, ladies? Well, I took a second look at it, and no wonder she hasn't finished it. The templates are just too small. Who wants to piece something like that? I'm going to enlarge this for her, and then maybe she can teach a Wild Goose class at her shop, and then I think it'd be something that everyone would enjoy doing. So that's just a hint to all of us. Sometimes we need to enlarge things, and don't try them when they're too small. Maybe you've got other projects around the house. For instance, I've had this wonderful tray that I've been wanting to stain and do something kind of fun with it, and I wanted to put patchwork inside, and now I can just design this oval using my freezer paper. And remember our painless patchwork project? I can go ahead and make an interesting design, color this in and coat it, cut it apart, and then this time cut out the exact same shape and not add my seam allowances and glue it back together. So I hope that you understand and can see the potential of freezer paper and all the many ways that you can use it today. I think it's just opened up a lot of new doors for us, and I think you'll enjoy using it. I promised you Madras madness. When you stop and think about Madras plaid, you think, oh my goodness, all those lines to match up. And my sister Jill had a collection of wonderful Madras fabrics. You can still buy this in the store. Don't go cut up your husband's favorite Madras pants or jacket, but it is readily available, and I would not ever try to match these plaids. We have discovered where a place that is really very effective, and that's working with the pineapple design. Now in quilting, you quite often think of that pineapple quilt as being based on a piece of fabric. Well, fabric, as you know, creates an extra layer inside, and I don't think you really want that in your quilt. The way Jill got out of that was to create the design, make a masterpiece, and then took this to a blueprinter's. Now you can get this duplicated between 35 and 40 cents a piece, and that beats drawing all those lines. You could have thought maybe we were going to do freezer paper, but not so here. You're actually going to sew right on this paper. And the way we have designed this is to cut all your Madras on the bias. And those become the corners of your quilts. They are going to create the corner design that works out. If you think of the log cabin as a design that radiates from the center and going out one row after another, then if you think about starting with one triangle but pieced together 4 times, as you can see as we have done here, then actually pinning this to the center of your blueprint piece of paper. Position that and pin it in place. Now the one tip I would suggest for you when you do this sewing, I would tighten your stitch length a little bit on the sewing machine. You associate sewing patchwork with 12 stitches per inch. Go ahead and tighten that up a little bit so that you can make a firmer stitch. I'd also suggest back stitching at each end, and that will make it easier because you're going to pull this paper off afterwards. We're not going to keep paper in the quilt. You realize that. Once that's positioned, then you would come and sew this fabric, and this has been cut on the straight of the grain or the crosswise, and it's been cut 1.5 inches wide. Sew and flip back. Position that in place. Thumb crease that. Then come to your next one. Position, and now we're ready to sew another one. If I can get all this Madras out of the way, I think you can get a good look. And of course, when you take this to the machine, sometimes there is enough that you might have to fold one edge back, and that won't be any problem. But I'm coming all the way out with my contrasting fabric. I'm going to make my stitch just a little bit tighter. I'm going to start and go ahead and back stitch, lock that in place, and then come all the way down, right on top of the paper. That's going to tear away after all of your pieces are sewn. When you get to the very edge here, come and back stitch. Once that's been anchored away, then you can come, remove extra threads from underneath. Then you're ready to come and position that to the back side. And then it's at this point that I would come and cut that away just like so. And then I'd trim this one off. If this eked out a little bit, come and trim that one off. I would then come, and this one of course goes over on this side, but before we sew that, we would need a turquoise that would be sewn and flip back here and flip back here. Let's pretend we had gotten around to that. Then we're ready to start with our Madras. Now, the interesting thing, and I think the reason this quilt is successful, is that these lines become guides for you, and as this is sewn and flipped back, and you notice you are covering some of the extra fabric in there, you can leave that or you can cut it away. It doesn't make any difference. But as you're sewing these, you have a guide. See how that's your sewing line and the little dot shows you where that raw edge comes out to? That keeps you on target as you're going around and around. She would come and position that, sew, and flip back. Then I would come and do my next Madras, Madras, Madras. Then I'd be ready to start with my solids again all the way out. And before you know it, you're creating all these angle lines, but look what's happening when you position the Madras in this manner. Because it was cut on the bias, all these edges then become parallel or at the same line as the outside edge of your block. And that adds a lot of stability to your block. Then Jill was ready to add her backing and, of course, her batting in between and do her quilting. Now we have one more design to show you with freezer paper. Did I say one more project? I lied. How about 3 more? That star with personality made into a necktie. Notice with 2 examples here how the rows are starting to develop. The freezer paper is still on there. You simply pull that away once it's been sewn. See the corner and point of that tie? Or another idea, ladies, just take some of that freezer paper, draw a rectangle or a square, divide it into quarter sections, remember to coat it. 1 sews to 2, 3 to 4, even put a notch on there, cut it apart, iron it on the back, pull it off and sew it, and see the designs that you can come up with. It can be for all patchwork, not necessarily strip piecing. But speaking of strip piecing, Glenda Gussman has done a fantastic job. Log cabin also in the corner of this quilt. This time the strip piecing has been done horizontal. The eagle is done in a horizontal manner. And this is just a teaser to the wonderful quilts that you're going to see next week. The Statue of Liberty was renovated, and along with that, we made quilts to celebrate. You'll view those that were seen in New York City, along with a marvelous array of garments from the Fairfield Show. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Lap quilting with Georgia Bonesteel is made possible by grants from Family Circle, the world's largest selling women's magazine. Ginger Incorporated, makers of scissors and shears for home and industry. And VIP Fabrics, a division of Cranston Printworks Company, America's oldest textile printer. Georgia Bonesteel's New Ideas for Lap Quilting is published by Oxmoor House.